Hello and welcome to Ask Strong Tells Anything. And it is my pleasure to welcome Jamie Sabbach of 110%. She is the principal of this company that provides services to a lot of different communities, explaining how they can make much more of their parks and recreation facilities and assets and the programming and all of the effort that goes into the things that we expect in our communities, which is great libraries and great parks and great swimming pools and just access to things that make our lives better because they are shared assets that we get to enjoy together. And yet the cost of providing those services can sometimes creep up on us. And so Jamie's work with 110% is especially taking all of the insights she learned doing parks and recreation management for various communities through the years and teaching on the topic at a university as well, and layering that in and saying there are core things that we can do to really begin to set ourselves on a better path. And so I'm so glad that you're here. And do you want to just share a little bit about your background and touch on a little bit of why parks and recreation matter?
Sure. Well, hi, everybody. Norm, great to see you as well as Edward and the entire gang. I appreciate the airtime here today. Appreciate the opportunity to spend a bit of time with all of you talking about the quality of life service in local government that I love deeply, and that is public parks and recreation. I spent 20 plus years as a field practitioner. I worked in Champaign, Illinois, Bloomington, Indiana, and Boulder, Colorado, in a variety of different capacities, frontline programmer all the way to executive. And the last 16 years now, I've had the pleasure, working alongside professionals, elected and appointed officials, community members, talking about what I would define as clarity, discipline, and courage in local government, how we think about spending and investing taxpayer resources to have the greatest impact on the commons, if you will. Pretty high level. I have the opportunity to teach in higher ed on occasion, and we have worked with agencies in now 46 of the 50 US states, done some work in Canada, and I've had the opportunity to speak on this very topic overseas as well. So I love parks and recreation. I have a lot of optimism and some significant grave concerns as well about the future of our field, and appreciate, again, the time with all of you today.
My mind immediately goes to the areas of concern that you said, hey, there are areas of concern that we need to touch on. Why don't we just start with that? And then we can go into, certainly areas for optimism, but what are some of the pressing needs that probably as local advocates, many of us either are unaware of or only see through one lens and kind of miss the bigger picture there?
Yeah, a great question. Obviously, a level of complexity to it. We have, a field that I've often said is one that's working hard to outgrow its mythology without losing its soul. We have a deeply rooted narrative, cultural narrative that's been created over the last 50 years, where we are something for everyone all the time, kind of on demand. We started as a social service, if you will, we'll say social welfare profession that has evolved into demand satisfaction. You want pickleball courts, you want yoga classes, I kind of jest, underwater basket weaving. You go to a council meeting, an electeds meeting, and the staff are then put on notice that you're going to make this happen. And that's been damning. We've overextended resources. Alternatively, people expect, we pay taxes, therefore we should get what we want, what we demand, what we desire, what we, need maybe. And it's just not feasible. It's not a practical reality to suggest that any tax base is going to cover everything that people expect. So we're in a quandary. We've got a lot of systems that have overextended themselves. They cannot pay for what they have. They've made promises that they can't keep. And it's become hugely problematic across the United States. Now, there are some systems that have done really good work for a very long time, and they're paying the bills, and they've not overextended themselves relative to debt. I'll tell a group of professionals, they say, well, does that mean we can't assume debt? That's not what this is suggesting, but we wouldn't buy $1 million house if we could only afford the mortgage on a $300,000 home. And that's hugely problematic in local government. And it's easy to spend money that's not yours. We don't feel it personally. We think the money is there. And it's just, I think, become a disconnect between, Strong Towns talks about a lot. We talk about the math. We do a lot of math in our work with aspiration, and the gaps have continued to widen. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge. I just read an article in the New York Times that was released yesterday about Mamdani, the new mayor, wants to make all recreation programs affordable in the community. Yet now the budget for Parks and Recreation in the city of New York is less than 0.5% of the total budget. That's not a practical reality. On top of the fact that they have hundreds of millions of dollars in maintenance backlog to take care of the system that's already there, that's already established. You think about iconic places like Central Park. Um, it's the messaging is bad. We're telling people that you can have all these things, and below the surface, behind the curtain, we know we can't afford it.
Why don't we jump in with Aaron's question here? The city of Fayetteville, this is in the chat, just passed a massive bond issue and said that 90 million of it is dedicated towards parks, and wondering how to advocate. About 30% of the total bond is going to go towards parks, with 60 million of that dedicated to an aquatic center. And they have $25 million more that they are going to spend on things that they haven't identified yet. So what is a prudent way to grapple with that? And maybe Aaron, if you want to jump in a moment and offer some follow up. But yeah, any ideas? I mean, this is the like, hey, we could take out money and people are giving money to us, so we should do new things because why not?
Yeah. Well, it's an oversimplification of that scenario, but did they do the math? I use often, you're going to build a $50 million facility today. It's likely going to cost taxpayers $140 million over the next 20 years because you have to operate it and you have to maintain it. And then in 15, 20 years, that's when you have to replace HVAC systems and you have to replace roofs. Aquatics facilities are the second most expensive infrastructure asset in public parks and recreation, second only to ice rinks. And we demand them. We want them. We understand the value of, learning to swim in communities. We understand that. These are quality of life services. What we need to simply understand before we dig a hole and make a promise is what is it going to cost the taxpayers over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And we have a lot of systems growing very quickly. I've heard Chuck talk about this. We have systems growing real quickly. I experience the microcosm of the larger conversation. We're building everything all at once. Well, the bills all come due all at once. And so in the moment, while it's shiny and new and fresh and exciting, everybody's thrilled, right? There's a fascination with that, the shiny penny. But we have to be thinking about the legacy we're leaving for, the next generation, as they say. We always say in our planning efforts, it's easy to plan for the citizens of 2026. It's easy to write a check. What we have to be thinking about is the consequence of our decision in 25 years, in 30 years. And so I would tell any system that's, exploring, experimenting with the idea of development, growth, build, just make sure you understand what this is going to cost over time. Construction is part of it, but it's not all of it. And I see this every day.
The vote was last night, and we lost by 200 votes. I was on the no camp. Just for full disclosure, I'm the treasurer for no on question 8. And we lost by 200 votes out of 17,000. So we tried to advocate, and what I advocated on was exactly that policy or issue of funding, of like, yeah, it's a cool 60 million now, but who knows into the future. So it's going to happen. We got this close. Everything else was 75% or above. So we got to move the margin a lot. Now it's moving forward. So it's going to go to council. The other thing here is there's kind of a Robert Moses-esque dynamic to it, in that they want to pave over a local park in a neighborhood to put in a giant parking lot in the aquatic center. So that's also part of the fight here. And so, we're just trying to figure out, like, how do we make the best out of what we consider a pretty bad situation as far as use of public funds. Part of that is, I'm trying to get him to close the old outdoor pool. Be like, okay, well, there's $3 million in planned improvements over the next 10 years. The best thing we can do is shutter that to at least lower that maintenance expense. I don't know. I'm just kind of waking up to this morning, so I'm just trying to think of like what are things I can suggest to the city and advocate for to the city council to ask them to do in this development process to kind of lower the burden into the future.
Yeah, I would add to that. It's interesting as somebody who's spent their life in and around this world. Um, Pools are incredible. They're incredible assets in communities. Open spaces are incredible assets in communities. It's the degree to which, right? The degree to which, how much do we build? Um, when we overextend, then it comes at a price, whatever that is. Is it no more pools? Is it no more parks? Is it no more whatever it is? Communities, I think, have struggled with just finding and staying in a lane and not giving everybody everything they expect and everything they want. Because I don't know of one community across the country that can do that and do it responsibly. We just want to keep building all these assets, and it's not practical. So is it, I'll say this loud and clear. I got into an interesting discussion with a gentleman. Discussion's probably a kind, gentle way of defining what it was. I was in a coffee shop in Boulder, Colorado, which is where I used to work. And it's a community with a lot of expectations, a lot of expectations. And this gentleman found out that I used to work for the city. He said, well, you clearly know we need a competitive pool here. And I said, well, I would beg to differ. We have 3 indoor pools in Boulder. We have 2 outdoor pools in Boulder, and we have a reservoir. And the city's struggling financially right now. You've got facilities where people have 5-gallon buckets in the gyms catching water from the roof because they're struggling to find the money to replace a roof on a facility. And he got incredibly argumentative with me. It's just, we need this. Well, you don't need it. You want it, and it's only going to serve a particular niche. And I understand, I'm not diminishing your interests, your desires, but that is not something this community can afford, nor is it going to serve the community proper. It's going to serve a niche market. And his expectation is taxpayers will pay for it, and the money is there. We've done a poor job of storytelling, and it sounds very cliche today, but this idea that Parks and Recreation provides benefits for everyone and the benefits are endless and you can have everything you want has been a dangerous storyline. We have to focus a little bit more on helping taxpayers understand the fiscal realities in local government, what their taxes pay for and what they don't. And we just haven't done that very well because it's not sexy. It's sexy to build new stuff. It's not sexy to talk about how much it costs to maintain it.
Is there something that you would recommend in terms of that 25 million? So just to pick up on the Fayetteville example, you mentioned pools that need to be maintained and things like that. From a Strong Towns perspective, we always say, like, I always start with, like, if you had 10 grand, what you should do is identify where people are in the community are struggling, identify the next smallest thing you can do to address that struggle, and then go out and do that thing, and then return to the cycle and continue with that. But it feels like that is so foreign a concept when we get into the world where it's like, but we have 25 million to burn through, or to use responsibly. I don't want to, presume on the folks in Fayetteville. But when you look at, like, well, there is a bond, or say there was a major patron that dropped $25 million into the lap at Fayetteville, like, what is a fiscally sustainable approach to using significant windfall like that?
Yeah, well, I would expect the vast majority of systems have a prioritization list of capital improvement projects that need investment. What is a typical bucket A, yeah. First list, if you will, priority list are ADA compliance, Americans with Disabilities Act compliance, and then health and safety related issues. If our roof's about to cave in, that's probably going to fall in bucket 1, as opposed to, well, we need a new scoreboard. Well, that's about customer retention. It's a nice to have. Maybe that's going to be tabled until whenever it is. But what we find commonly, I would suggest commonly, I've been in and around this space 36 years now, is, well, we got this fast cash, and so let's build something new. Because we can celebrate that. We can have our councilor or electeds stand out at a space with golden shovels and big hard hats and have a full, color picture above the fold in the local paper, celebrating what we're adding to the community, the value add. We don't see ribbons around restroom, renovations. Although I would argue we need to be doing more of that. every time you place your irrigation system in a park, I think we should celebrate that.
Right.
You put a new roof on a building, let's celebrate that. Let's cut a ribbon for that. So I think that, we see that money and we go, what can we do next? As opposed to let's be disciplined enough to commit that to what is already in this organization that needs our attention and needs money. We've just got our priorities flipped on their heads sometimes.
Maybe related then is like unfunded master plans. Like my city has a recreation master plan and it lays out all of these things. And yet it does feel like pie in the sky sort of thinking, because it's, they got a consultant in and the consultant did a survey of all of the like needs in the community. They talked to all the sports groups and they basically just have a wish list. And I wish that there was more of the discipline of like, where are the health and safety needs that we have, but especially the prioritization. I mean, Aaron, I know what you're doing in terms of the like local pool that needs to close, but like that's the kind of stuff that like breaks my heart, because like Michelle said, that pool is the cheapest pool that you can, or the cheapest pool for a community member to own is already embedded in a community, not the new one, but the one that's already like embedded in place. And so how do we, like, is it just on the financial side, or is there some sort of like persuasion that you have found like in the name of restraint at minimum, or future proofing that we can use to like make better use of our existing assets rather than having to like shutter and open? Like there's this strange dichotomy of like, we're poor, new thing, we're poor, new thing.
Yes.
I just don't understand it.
Yeah, well said. Well, the master plan you just described is what we call a master plan built on unicorns and rainbows. And we do needs assessments, which are not needs assessments. They're interest surveys.
Yeah.
A need is isolated older adults. Need is teens who are isolated, contributing to poor mental health indicators. A need is we have an obesity crisis in our community. Those are needs. We have defined needs as more soccer fields, more pickleball courts, a brand new pool. Those are not needs. And so again, I go back to what words are we using? Semantics matter in this work. Meaning matters. We have done a very poor job of storytelling, and we've told stories by way of these master plans. It's we needed this, we needed this, we need to add this. And it's been devastating. We won't touch a master plan RFP. We won't even consider it if there's no fiscal analysis embedded in it, because you need to start with what's your current fiscal reality, and then you can begin to think about what are our priorities and where should we make those investments. Anything other than that is questionable. I won't call it irresponsible, but it is a very questionable practice to promise things to a community and ask them what they want when behind the scenes the staff are going, we'll never be able to do that. We can barely afford what we're doing now. And that is a common narrative in local park and rec systems across the country. I teach a class on financial sustainability across the United States. And I've had not one person come up to me and say, hey, we're rolling in cash. We have plenty of staff. We're able to take care of all of our infrastructure. No, the consistent messaging is our communities want more. They don't want to pay more. They don't understand where their taxpayer dollars go and where they don't. That's the common thread, or those are the common threads that we see. And so I think the more we can help communities by way of planning efforts, when you have community engagement, it's not giving people 3 minutes in the microphone and have an open mic night. It's an opportunity to help. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to meet you where you are, but please kind of be open to us helping you understand how this system functions and what the challenges are, as well as the opportunities for everyone in this community, because we want you to be a co-steward with us. Rather than you just expect us to steward, you have to help us co-steward. The city and the district only exists with you as the resident and as the taxpayer. There's no entity without the taxpayer. So it's a lot. This isn't the easy stuff. It's not the popular, what's the latest trend, and then let's go make it happen, which is unfortunately what we've embraced.
Is it just a matter of overextension, or is there also this idea that like by the popular mayor of New York cutting fees, that there's this persistent approach to like nearing starvation in our systems because they're good and they should be good for everyone and should be available to everyone, and kind of this allergy to any kind of user fee or user payment, which results in substandard services, but also like the ignoring of long-term consequences, which means like you're existing on borrowed time the longer that you do that.
That's a great question. The word affordability, we all know, is politically charged right now. But every organization I work with, I'll ask, professional staff questions. And often what comes up is we need to keep our services affordable. And my follow-up is always, what does that mean and for whom?
Yeah.
You have a lot of people in your community hypothetically have an ability to pay. They just don't want to. So they have an ability to pay, but no willingness to pay. And you have people in your community that may have a willingness to pay and can't. Mm-hmm. That I think is a navigation for where we should invest subsidies, and not giving everybody a free ride, if you will, because somebody's paying the bills. There's always somebody paying the bills. Nothing's free. And so there's an allergic reaction to, you're going to charge us. But, we often talk in our pricing exercises in our work, we pay $1,000 for a smartphone. People go to Starbucks and they'll spend $7 on a fancy coffee or a latte or a maca, whatever. And we don't want to charge people $1 for a program. That's a completely backwards way of thinking when we suggest in our systems and our service minds that these are highly valuable services. There's an incredible margin of utility to Parks and Recreation, but we devalue it simply by saying, well, we're not going to charge. I was in Boulder, we had a senior center. People would drive up to the senior center in Mercedes and Audis regularly, and they would complain that we were charging them $1 for a senior lunch. I'm like, if I subsidize you, that means I can't subsidize that family that lives in Section 8 housing. And so we've got our wires crossed, and I think largely, again, the follow-up will be, well, I pay taxes. Well, you understand your taxes barely pay for our park system, let alone all the recreation services you expect and the facilities we've built and the aquatic facilities that we have and the pickleball courts that you now want. It's a messaging problem.
Yeah.
Jamie, it's really interesting. When we were in Medicine Hat, the Parks Department was struggling with that too. They were struggling with the city council that had a list of like the dozen new things they wanted to have, and the community expectation that all the park systems would be platinum level services. So every household would be within a 10-minute walk of a pool, every facility be open to the public for free. And they were struggling because they couldn't afford the projects. It wasn't until they had some confidence with the finance department, where Parks was talking with the finance, and just finance said, look, there's no more money. There's no money coming in. When Parks presented their annual budget to the city council when we were doing our community action lab, the statement they had in the very opening of their budget booklet was that there is not enough money to go around. We can't afford all of these things. And that was their kickoff, which was like shocking. People were like, what do you mean we can't afford this stuff? What do you mean a department wasn't grasping for more revenue sources? And what it led to in their community was a completely different discussion about their parks department. At that moment, when somebody said, no, there's no more, we have a finite amount, we have limited resources, that led to the community thinking differently about their parks program and about what they really needed and what they were trying to serve. And I found that fascinating because when they did it, the entire city hall was on pins and needles watching, all the staff watching this to see, because Parks wasn't the only fiscally constrained department at the city. Everybody else was coming in, and Parks was just the ones brave enough to be the first at it.
Picking up there, in particular, one of the things that they pivoted from, instead of doing expensive playground replacements, they put simple money into programming, which is a staff cost. So there's an ongoing way in which, like, upfront you can pay for the playground equipment, but then it will age and needs to be replaced. I probably still have slivers in my hands from some of the wooden structures that now have been banned, and it's the worst. But there's certainly, the ability to say, like, I love that quote that I shared in there, like, what do people really want? Probably in parks, they want more interaction. And interaction across volume levels. Like, there has to be that broader spectrum of what we accommodate in our parks. But I think that is something that I look at the new glossy like playgrounds that are stuck, in subdivisions, and I'm like, that's not going to get used. But if you can create a bit of a pop-up market or a reason, just the permission structure for those things to occur. Do you have any suggestions of how to cultivate more community-led, like co-ownership or taking responsibility for places? Because that seems to me to be one of the missing pieces, that there's this sense like the staff need to be the one that come to unlock the storage locker, and the staff need to be the ones that like turn on the lights. And be, if you're going to host a special like outdoor soccer game, that everything is off limits because everything will be vandalized. And vandalism is a real need and a real challenge to confront. But help us, because it feels like the role of strong citizens is in part to like make these types of public spaces better. Do you have any recommendations on ways to stir that up?
Yeah, I think there are quite a few models, and then there's also the cautionary tale, right? Yeah. So I think back to my early programming days. I was a 20-something, which seemed like yesterday and was a long time ago. We had an Adopt a Park program, Adopt a Flower program. It was one of the first in the U.S. at the Champaign Park District in Illinois. And so we had local businesses and local, residents, neighbors would adopt flower beds in parks, and they would adopt right-of-ways, and it was up to them to plant and care for and, cultivate and all of those things. And it was wildly successful. And they would actually also contribute money. So they were giving, man and woman hours, human hours, to take care of, be caretakers of these spaces. And then they were contributing the funds to plant. So it took the burden, if you will, I hate to call it that, but the work off of the shoulders of the district. And then it was, I did that. I took care of that. And so there was a slightly different ownership in that. There's a organization we did a master plan for a couple of years ago, a ball field. It was not a competitive ball field. It was a very common, typical, you think backstop, a couple of aluminum benches, ball field with an equipment box right behind the backstop, and a local little league. The coaches would have keys to the equipment box, right? And they would manicure it and take care of it for game time. The problem in that particular case was they felt like it was their ball field. And so if I wanted to go out and play catch with my kid, I wasn't allowed, because they groomed the field early in the day, and then it was, don't walk on the chalk, right? Don't step on the pitcher's mound. So you want to kind of delegate, if you will, distribute some of the responsibility to user groups to help them feel that sense of ownership. But then the ownership can sometimes get to be a little bit much. So and then, Colorado Springs, which was one of the first systems, maybe the only system in the state of Colorado that actually divested of the park and rec system for a period of time because they couldn't pay the bills. They were mothballing parks. Essentially, they weren't mowing. They weren't picking up trash. The restrooms were not open. A lot of community members said, hey, what can we do to help? Right? We want our parks to be mowed. And so they started to do some of the work. They got to the rebound place. Revenue started to increase. They opened the floodgates again, and then we had short-term memory loss. We're right back to where we were. So lots of examples, but I think it's really finding those citizens and engaging them in a manner, again, where they really feel like we're doing this for the community. We're not just doing it for us or for me. We're doing it for everybody. And those people are out there. They're out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Michelle has a great question. I think that's very relevant here, that they have a new Parks and Rec director, and she's asking what are some ways that she can connect with them, sort of engage with them in order to be ready for, she said, set up a positive relationship. So later they do all the small bets I'd like to suggest later. Do you want to talk about some of the like challenges of that public to like staff interface, especially with leaders, and some guidance on like, you come in as a consultant and they need to listen to you, or they're paid to, but there's a sense in which citizens are definitely being heard. I definitely hear that, in the way when I talk to park staff, but there's also this gap. How do we talk across the podium or the aisle that way?
If it's, Michelle, just a matter of, reaching out to the new director, I will tell you that I don't know one professional that wouldn't appreciate a community member reaching out, having a conversation, going for coffee and saying, welcome to the community. I'm here to help. If you're going to go in and demand pickleball courts, I would say, please don't meet with that director. But if you're going to go in and say, I'm a citizen. I care deeply about my park and rec system. This is an exciting time for us. And I just want you to know that, I want to be an advocate for parks and recreation in my community. I think that would be amazing. To me, that's gold. Because we oftentimes see our citizens, right or wrong, through the lens of opposition. They just want something of us rather than how can they help us and how can they be a champion for these really important services in the community. You also then become somebody I think that they can rely on, lean on to understand some of the underbelly of the system, because then you become a spokesperson for that executive in the community. You may have an opportunity, depending on your interest, to serve on an appointed a board or something like that to champion the system. But I will tell you, in my experience as a field practitioner, I always appreciated having relationships with community members where I just knew that they cared deeply about the system and they wanted to understand more. So.
Great comment to you, Edward. Coffee can unlock every door at City Hall. Staff are always looking for champions they can partner with.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I always said, aligning it with military think and speak, your best friend in the military is the cook. I think your best friend, and when you're in local government is the finance people.
Yeah.
Which you referred to earlier. And it's finding those special relationships, whether it's an advocate in the community, whether it's somebody within City Hall. Yeah. Coffee, chai, in my case, is a very powerful thing. So.
Well, Saeed, come to you in a moment, but I think one of the elements too is when you come in as like, why aren't you doing X, Y, or Z? That's very different from why can't we? And why can't we is a really door opening question, especially with somebody that's in a position of responsibility where they will be able to say, well, quite frankly, here is why we're struggling to get there. Or it's something that we'd like to do, but these are the conditions that really are a burden for us. And so, that can be an element of it as well. Like, why can't we do this? Okay. And without the polemics of like somebody's to blame as to, and that's, I did a presentation in Pacifica, California, and the opener, he said, this is not a personnel problem. This is a systems problem. And if we can really grapple with that, then the personnel don't have to be in the crosshairs. They become co-laborers in identifying how do we address the predicament we're in and the path forward for us.
Yeah, I think we have a chance to redo here, and that's why I carry incredible optimism into this work. It's, I mentioned I teach that class. After day one, people, I'll check in on day two and they'll go, I'm so depressed. And I said, good, because I have forced you to take the rose-colored glasses off. But now, as we understand where we are, if you will, the playing field, we can be much more thoughtful and intentional and intelligent about how we're going to respond and react, rather than everything's great and let's just keep building stuff. I'm not sure who it was. I just caught a glance of somebody saying the neighboring community. That drives me crazy. The whole benchmarking exercise when it comes to money. Number one, when you benchmark against other systems, you're under the assumption they know what they're doing. And that is a dangerous assumption because maybe they didn't do the math. Maybe they have no idea. Maybe they've just been setting, arbitrary prices and they've been making arbitrary decisions. And so that's hugely problematic. And the other, I think, really challenging assumption today is economic development is going to be our panacea. Local government gets on average 5 to 10% of the sales tax revenues generated from big projects. And so local government oftentimes ends up footing the bill for all of the stuff that we put in under the umbrella of, well, it's going to have an economic impact. That's a crazy assumption without the study, without the research. And their communities, on LinkedIn every day, this is going to be great for the local economy and we're going to have economic impact. And we're even seeing it in professional sports teams and semi-professional sports teams, and communities are waking up like Kansas City going, you are not using my taxpayer money to subsidize that. That's not happening. So we just, again, the fallback is the math.
I don't know if it's a question or observation. I was on our council feed today, and they have commissioned the financial projection report, something like what Strong Towns offers in the financial tool for free. I'm sure the accounting firm charged them a lot for that report, but what the report was saying was exactly what I had come into about that our municipality has no debt right now. I found out based on the financial tool of the Strong Towns. but it's on the path to go deep into debt, which was very interesting to me, that how accurate is the system that Strong Towns has developed in that simple tool, which has been there a lot of work behind it. The other thing was interesting was that our mayor was adamant that he had set aside $200 million for a park at the edge of the town for a new subdivision. And he wasn't happy that he has to say, forget it. So they were all the time for an hour and a half, they were discussing different ways of, can we borrow? If we borrow, how can we, lower the cost of borrowing, or can we raise the taxes? None of them, not even one, talked about, can we increase our revenues by increasing our tax base, which is much more effective than. And I'm so happy that I can easily understand this now, because I have studied Swingtown's priorities, and it was very eye-opening, that very complex topics that could be frightening. Even each of them starting to speak, they were saying that, oh, finance is not my strong skill, but but it should be. Yeah, as a counselor, you should know the very basics of running that city. But anyway, yeah, they were not talking about stopping the development of a new city hall, which is going to cost a lot more. They didn't discuss it. They were just talking about, can we go to this province or go to the federal? That's the only way we can survive, by going to the province and federal and ask for money. So it confirms for me everything that the Strong Towns has been saying. It was bad that my city is going into debt, but at least we know why.
I think every elected official should be part of these kinds of conversations. Yeah. And they're not. It wasn't that long ago, I had a council member say, well, our property taxes. And I'm like, you don't get any property taxes here. You're a sales tax supported system. I mean, sometimes it's the fundamentals, right? It's like in any sport, any activity. We need to be good at the fundamentals. And in local government, sometimes those fall through the cracks. And then we're immediately making decisions that are generational decisions. Some of these elected officials are making decisions that are going to have far-reaching consequences. So that would just be, I guess, my response to Zahid's comments.
Jamie, when you're having these discussions in the communities you're working, what are the sorts of things we've talked about it, and you kind of touched on it, but I just want to kind of bring it forward. So we have lots of citizens that are out there looking at this new pool project, this new bond project coming forward. Where should they be looking in the budgets and the documents? What is that thing that like jumps off the page to you, that our community can't afford this? What is that number that's not shown, or the number that's hidden in the reports that they should be looking at, or the questions they should be asking when these projects come forward?
That's a great question. I don't know that there's any one thing. I've spent a lot of time in the communities in which I'm working alongside. Most of them use cash accounting, so I think even the finance office doesn't quite understand their debt load. I think at least minimally they should understand the condition of their assets. I think that's an incredible barometer in terms of condition. So Park and Rec system alone has $40 million in maintenance backlog, and they're carrying, X number of dollars in debt for the next 30 years. We probably shouldn't build anything new, right? I mean, I don't know that there's a specific silver bullet number or, a magic number that we're looking for, but I think it's like our personal checkbooks. Again, it's the best way I can speak to professionals is to get it to the, maybe granular level. If you have all of this debt, you have $25,000 in credit card debt, and you're bringing in this much money in revenue, and these are your costs of living, here's the gap. Can you afford to go buy a more expensive house or that new car that you want or whatever it is? And I think those very simple things become tools that can help organizations make more informed decisions. I tell systems all the time, there's so many little things you can do to check boxes to move the needle relative to being more fiscally responsible, being better financial stewards. But if I were to tell any park and recreation director or executive in this moment what they should do first, it would be a conditions assessment. Take a look at every single asset you own and understand whether it's in good condition or better. And if it's not, you've got a gap. And what is the cost associated with bringing an asset to good condition? That's your deferred maintenance. Do the math. Understand what that total is. And if here's my revenue and here's my assumed debt and here's my deferred maintenance, you've got a story to tell there. And that should be, again, the barometer by which I can make decisions about assuming more debt moving forward. The little community in which I live built a Taj Mahal fire station that belongs in Denver. It doesn't belong in a mountain community of 5,000 people. They now carry a $3+ million debt payment for 30 years. And the park and rec system alone has $20 million in maintenance backlog. Our ballroom in our little arts facility on the river, I used the 5-gallon bucket story earlier. Literally in the ballroom sits a 5-gallon bucket catching water coming out of the roof. But we've overextended ourselves. And so that's a fantastic question, Edward. Again, I don't know that I'd say any one thing, but those are things that I pay attention to.
Yeah, I think what we've been seeing in the finance decoder, I just did the finance decoder. It was shared with me from staff from Claremont, Florida. Here's an area early in their community growth, and they're showing they're in great financial health. But I go around and they've got the big stormwater facility with the Parks and Rec on it. They've got the great boathouse on the lake, the giant beach. They're looking to do more and more parks. What the finance decoder doesn't show is what professionals call deferred maintenance, meaning we have obligations to maintain stuff that we are not including in the depreciation of our assets in our municipal budgets. There's a lot of reasons why that doesn't move forward. If somebody wants to do back of the napkin math, if you're going to build a $5 million pool, we can look at how long that building will last. And we could take that $5 million and appreciate that out over that time. And all of a sudden, that should show us what that needs to be. That doesn't include the chemicals for the pool. It doesn't include the staffing. Doesn't include if there's a hailstorm and the roof gets damaged or a pipe breaks. But that deferred maintenance, just so folks know, is not generally shown in the municipal budgets.
Yep.
It's hidden on the web page. It shows up in verbal conversations in all of those meetings. And taking that true assessment of all of your assets, Jamie, I think is really brilliant. And citizens asking because when you talk about the partners, when I meet with the Parks and Rec directors, they're always like budget time, really frantic. Because how are they going to advocate for the budgets they need? What is the true reality? And then they show up at the budget meetings saying they need more resources to maintain everything they're asked to do. And the council members show up with their wish list of additional assets they want to add on. We want this better piece. I have folks that have shown up from the community that want us to convert all of our tennis courts this year to pickleball and LED lights. And that is a cost and additional liability that doesn't show up in the finance decoder.
Yeah, I totally agree. The National Park Service, 2012, there was a report that came out that said they had $12 billion in maintenance backlog. There was a contrary report that said it was $80 billion in 2012. We know 2020 through 2022, more traffic than ever in our national park system. Yet the reporting out year over year, because deferred maintenance, which is what we're talking about, the definition is the cost associated with bringing an asset to good condition or better. That's the National Park Service definition. Since 2012, well, over about an 8-year window, every article you'd read, every storyline, even on the National Park Service site, it said maintenance backlog for the National Park Service is $12 billion. There's no way it was $12 billion in 2020 if it was $12 billion in 2012. Shame on the National Park Service for misleading all of us, we all know, even if you don't use a CAGR and you just use a CPI, modest 3% year over year, it's not $12 billion for 8 years straight when we know the federal government threw very little money at maintenance. That's the same story that we're shining a light on at the local level. Austin Parks and Recreation reported out $700 billion or $700 million in maintenance backlog, 50 aquatic facilities, average age 50 years. San Francisco, $1 billion maintenance backlog, $1 billion plus. So I am encouraging systems that have not done that work to understand that work and to start telling the story. And I always say data is only as good as the analysis is only as good as the story we tell with the data. You know, you can throw a spreadsheet at somebody and they're going to look at it likely cross-eyed in Parks and Recreation because most of these people are social servants. They could care less about the data. But you show a pie chart or a bar graph and then you have a storyline. Our capital picture is ominous. People go, oh, okay, I'm starting to understand. So most systems, I don't believe, have done the conditions assessment. They don't understand their maintenance backlog. And I think if they did that one thing, it would be an incredibly powerful story for them to start telling.
It shifts the entire focus of the discussion at that point. And in the budgets, if you had that backlog of stuff, it may not show up in the annual budget because the way that municipal financing works, the finance directors don't want to know that because they can't handle it. I've also found sometimes when I talk to finance directors, they're like, okay, I've carved out money for your department to go deal with that backlog, but the backlog is so deep, it would take you 3 years to catch up on it. And finance directors want you to spend the money the year of, and they get upset that you have to roll it over year after year. But putting it within your Parks and Rec documentation, putting it within the maintenance reports that you have for parks, sharing it with the public, that helps to add that coalition of folks to understand, like, we want nice things, but we want them to stay nice.
Yeah. Napa, California did a conditions assessment. They are rock stars in our field right now. I tell everybody that is interested in a really great story, going from devastation to being the golden child in the system, it's Napa, California. In April of 2020, they were essentially directed to shutter Parks and Recreation. 60% of the recreation side of the budget was going away, including staff. They were going to move into community development, and Parks was going into public works. It was just a tragic story for a system that had a rich history. One of the first things they did was a conditions assessment. And they told the story. We have $70 million in maintenance backlog. Our gap year over year, expenditures over revenues, continues to grow. So that gap goes bigger and bigger. We're only putting a small portion of our total bucket in taking care of what we have because we've been afraid to reduce our service menu. And so they really were very thoughtful about the progression of, steps, if you will, they took. And they flipped the script. There's more and more systems doing that, but it did start with, let's understand our fiscal footing. Are we on very kind of questionable, volatile footing, or are we in a place where we're actually structurally sound? But they started with that. We're going to hire somebody. We know it's an investment. We're going to hire somebody to come in, an expert, to essentially assess the condition of all of our assets and do the math for us. And then we can start telling our city council and our community, we need $70 million to take care of our backlog. And currently we've got $858,000 a year that we're putting into our infrastructure. If we don't change this, we're never going to catch up. We have no chance of ever catching up. And they put it in the local paper, which was brilliant. They invited the media into the room, and the media started telling the story to the community. So it wasn't just the staff, it was the media, right, by way of helping the community understand. So,
Christina, and then Greg.
Here, Jamie. I wish we had a local paper because not having one really makes communication very, very, very difficult. I wanted to ask about how do you, we all know about the squeaky wheel, the people who come to the meetings and assert that what they view as the needs are the most important needs. How do you actually get down to the people who, I'm sorry, they've got families, they have so many responsibilities, they don't get to the meeting, and their needs are in fact greater. how do you surface those? How do you reveal those within a community?
That's a great question. And, I'm not going to sit here and suggest that, they're all revealed. They're just not. If you're in a community with 80,000, 100,000 people, it's essentially an impossibility. But we always look for what we call representative feedback. So you're not going to hear from everyone, but if we heard from representatives in different neighborhoods, different age groups, different special interests, so that it is not dominated by youth sports groups, which tend to be the ones that dominate the public realm in our world. So, for example, we've got an incredible engagement firm that we work with, and I would actually call them an identity firm because they're trying to identify the identity of the community and the identity of the organization that fits within that community. So we're starting a brand new master plan in Addison, Illinois. It's for the Addison Park District. Some of our first focus group meetings, one of the focus group meetings is school teachers and counselors. One is public safety and public health officials. One is going to be business owners and business leaders in the community. Another one is going to be intergovernmental entities that are in that same community. Because what we're starting with are needs. What are the perceived social needs, environmental needs, economic needs in this community? And then we engage different residents, and we try to do it differently. PTA meetings, churches, schools. We actually have engaged residents who are, I'll suggest, influencers in neighborhoods to open their garages and invite people on a Saturday morning to their house for cookies and coffee. And it's meeting people where they are. It sounds kind of cliche. We've also done $5 for 5 minutes. So if you set up in front of a grocery store, maybe in a more vulnerable community, and just have a conversation with somebody for 5 minutes. Do you have 5 minutes? We'll give you $5. What do you like about living here? What don't you like about living here? What's missing for you? And so they're not questions about what kind of parks do you want or what kind of recreation services do you want. It's much more granular about them, how they feel about living where they do, and what they feel like is a gap or what's missing for them. I will tell you today, we're quite concerned about engaging with communities that need to be engaged with, largely because of the presence of ICE in communities. Addison, I mentioned, is 48% Hispanic, Latina. And so we're trying to be very thoughtful, sensitive, and have a heightened awareness going into that community about how are we going to make sure we hear from all representative community members in a time where some people feel incredibly vulnerable and scared, and they're not necessarily interested in engaging with government in this moment, whether it's a local parks district or anybody else. So we're not having meetings in City Hall. We're not having meetings in community centers. We're trying to have meetings in these, what may be perceived as neutral, kind of safe spaces. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
We will come to Greg, your question in a moment, Jamie, if you're able to go just a little longer. But just before a few folks have to roll out next week, I'm also excited. We're talking something quite different, which is water and frontage, the idea of a frontage levy. And Andy Posterick is on the call here. He's from Fort Smith. And so we're going to be talking about water fees. And actually here, I want to share it because it's worth sharing. Andy, I'm previewing your slide. So the current method is you basically pay for the amount of water that you use, and there's delivery charges that are embedded in it. But probing the question of, in a much more mature way, what does it look like if we actually began to assess based on frontage as a portion of the fee rather than just how much water did you use? And you can see that the consequence or the benefit that it would provide for a lot of our existing users, but also reducing some of the incentive of leaving properties vacant and contributing to the continued either blight of a community or just spacing everything out. So it's a fascinating discussion. We have a few more water and sewer people that are going to be jumping on the call, joining us. So I expect a riveting discussion. But Jamie, this has been way more fun. So I'm grateful for that, or much more like I get to not have to think about sewage. So I'm grateful for that. Greg, you had a question?
I was involved in a project where we did a recreation center for the community quite a few years ago. And the question we asked is, if you want to do this, this is how much sales tax it will take to fund capital and to maintain it in the future. If you do not approve this bond, if you do not approve this sales tax, this project will not happen. and then turn it into some sort of enterprise fund where people have to pay fees to use it. And you got to do, if you're going to do something like that, you got to do more than just an aquatic facility, because people generally will not pay enough to maintain an aquatic facility. You got to spread the cost much wider than that. Also, just coming up with numbers of what your backlog of maintenance is not enough. I can put that in terms of a very small thing that happened to me one time when we had a water main break. And in order to fix the water main break, it cost us $35,000 to fix this water main break. We gave the background to the elected officials, and the only question that came out of that review of the cost of doing that was, why did you spend $15 on grass seed? Because they couldn't deal with $35,000. They could deal with something they go to the store to buy. $70 million is an incredible number that doesn't compare to anything that people deal with on a regular basis. If you deal with that in a sales tax or in property taxes, tell them what it's going to cost them individually every year to do X. If you can say, yes, we can put in this park and it will cost the typical taxpayer an extra $500 a year, that's a number they can deal with. Yeah. But if you don't tell them that, they think it's free. Yeah. And that's one of the biggest communication problems we've ever had. Just a humorous thing too, once is I've dealt with parks and recreation districts, and I had one parks and recreation commissioner come to me one time and say, I fully understand the relationship between the city and the Parks and Recreation District. You pay for it, we use it. So they expected the city to cover all capital costs, and then they would cover the operations and probably come to the city asking for money to subsidize the operations. So having a separate government doesn't mean it covers all of the costs. And I think we need to pay attention to what the costs of things are, not to whether we have a separate government, which then has an entirely separate administrative structure. It costs a whole lot more to set up a separate government than it does a department.
Jamie, I'll go to you for closing words as we wrap up. But your thoughts, as you said at the beginning, that we need clarity, discipline, and courage. That really stands out in what you've shared here. And I'm especially taking away that distinction between what do we have need of versus what we are interested in. And actually probing that is so valuable in helping us to right size, I think, some of our expectations in a lot of key important ways. So thank you for doing this. Closing thoughts, anything that stands out to you from the discussion?
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate getting an opportunity to visit with all of you again. So I want to extend my appreciation to all of you for, spending an hour of your time today with us. I will very shamelessly plug that I am releasing a book on April 21st, which is called The Bison Principle. And it is, the subtitle is Clarity, Discipline, and Courage in Local Government Through the Lens of Parks and Recreation. And so I'm very excited about that. It speaks to some of what we all discussed today. So that has been a labor of love. And Chuck actually was quite gracious enough to read it and wrote a testimonial or endorsement, little blurb for the book. Yeah, and I will just say, I'm kind of getting towards the twilight of my career. I still got a lot of tread on the tires, but I tell folks if they ever want to just chat about what's happening in their communities, there's anything I can do to help. That's what we're here for. We've differentiated ourselves in this space because, Norm, going back to what you said earlier about master plans that are visioning documents. We're trying to flip the script on that and start with the fiscal analysis first. So we go in eyes wide open is what we say often. So with that said, again, it was an absolute pleasure getting to spend an hour with you, Norm. You're an incredibly gracious host, and brilliant, and I love the questions that you ask, and I appreciate all the commentary that was shared as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jamie. Fantastic. This has been riveting. And thanks for watching, folks. I'm going to turn off the recording here because there's just more to come. And so definitely come join us for an upcoming session of Ask Strong Anything. We're talking water and sewer and stormwater next week with Andy from Fort Smith, and just diving into a whole lot of things. But yeah, Jamie, fantastic. So much to go. And if you can, head out, find a park, and just bask in the fact that they exist and they're awesome and they deserve our support. Thanks.